Hey guys, I'm Steve. Nice to meet you. Over the last 25 years, I've done nothing but automation and I absolutely love it. For the last 5 or more years, I've been using Selenium with Visual Studio, and I'm very passionate about sharing the information that I've learned with you. I don't want you to have to go through 25 years of trial and error, 25 years of mistakes, 25 years of rewriting frameworks, 25 years of trying to understand page synchronization, how to do debugging, how to do troubleshooting, how you interact with Microsoft Windows dialogues, how you do SQL queries. I have learned all of this stuff, and I'm going to take this information and put it into really easy to understand videos so that way you can benefit from it and make your automation projects even better than they are today. So here's a little background about myself. So like I said, I've been doing automation for over 25 years. When I first got started, I learned how we could automate the verification of these massive text report files with Perl. Now, a regular QA person would save off a baseline, get the new version of the application, rerun the report, and then do their best to look at thousands of lines of data in these files and try to make sure that they were exactly the same, which almost impossible, and it took them lots and lots of hours to do. But through the use of coding or automation with Perl, we could verify the entire file's contents and all the pieces that we cared about in literally seconds. And I was like, wow, if you can do that, what else is possible? And then that led me down this massive journey in automation where I then used Windrunner. That was the first UI verification tool I used. And then I had a pretty long stint with Rational Robot. Absolutely love that tool. It was one of my all-time favorites. I used QTP. I used Rational Functional Tester. I did a small bit with Load Runner. I used Silk. Then I moved on to Coded UI with Visual Studio. I don't know if any of you guys get a chance to use Coded UI, but if you actually did it the way that Microsoft wanted you to, you ended up with this massive UI map file that was not maintainable. It was completely unreadable, and it was just a huge mess. So we developed some techniques to deal with the UI maps where we would split them up and bring them in, but I couldn't find anybody that did something like that. I really wish I would have shared videos even back then. But luckily, Coded UI is behind us. So after that, I now use Selenium with Visual Studio. It's been an absolute blast. I've learned so much. There's so much that I can share, and I'm just so excited to get these videos created for you so that way you could start using everything that I've learned and not have to go through all of the pain that I did. So you may be asking yourself, well, Steve, what are you going to cover on this new channel? Good question. So I want to cover lots of different things, mostly, of course, based on the name of the channel, there'll be a lot of videos about Selenium itself. But aside from that, there'll be tips and tricks videos. There'll be videos about debugging, videos about troubleshooting, page synchronization. You know, for the last 5 years, I would say that is one of the most important things I've found about any automation project. I mean, I used to see it even way back with Rational Robot, but now with all kinds of new technologies that can update the page without going back to the server and stuff, page synchronization is super tricky. And I've rewritten methods to do page synchronization, and I feel like I finally have it nailed. It's the best I've ever seen it. I don't see anybody else on the internet doing what I'm doing, and I'm super excited to share it with you. So some other things that I also want to talk about are things like reducing your overall execution time, reducing redundant code, making your code more maintainable, making your test cases more reliable, and also some third-party tools. Like, for example, if you absolutely must interact with a Microsoft Windows dialog, you can't do that through Selenium. You need to use a third-party tool, and the best one that I found to do that is called AutoIT. Now, it does have some downfalls and drawbacks, but it does work pretty good, and in certain situations, it can get you out of a bind. So since this channel actually is about Selenium, let's start talking about that. So what is Selenium? Well, Selenium is made up of three main parts. The first one is the Selenium WebDriver, then we have the Selenium IDE, and then we have the Selenium Grid. So I'd like to just take a minute and just give you a brief overview of each one of them. The first part of Selenium is the Selenium WebDriver, which consists of language-specific bindings that enable you to drive a browser like Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. Now, when I say drive a browser, I mean that you can open one, and then you can enter text into fields, click on radio buttons, check boxes, pick things in drop-downs, etc. And then, of course, you can close the browser. Now, one of the things I love so much about Selenium is their developers behind the scenes are trying to keep Selenium up to date with the most recent technologies all the time. I remember back when I used to use Microsoft's Coded UI, there were times where I had to wait up to 6 months for them to put out an update to fix an issue or to start working with some new technology that had come around. And as you probably know, technology these days, it just moves so fast. So just recently, when iframes and shadow roots became available, Selenium was right on top of it. They provided functionality so that way we could test against it, and therefore we weren't held up, and Selenium is just amazing in that aspect. The second piece of Selenium is their IDE. So their Selenium IDE is actually an extension that you load into a browser like Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. And what it does is it allows you to do record and playback type functionality that automatically generates a script that you can then run as a part of your full automation suite. Now, while the Selenium IDE does provide some value when possibly you're troubleshooting, because you could see how Selenium actually is trying to interact with an object, like maybe it's using an X path that's different than yours, or it's using a CSS selector and you hadn't tried that yet. But in general, I don't really recommend that you use the IDE unless you need to, just because the code that it's going to generate is not going to be as good as the code that you're going to learn to create. And then when issues come up and you have to get into the code and fix it, you'll know how it works. It'll be easier for you to maintain, and it'll be easier for you to get things going again. The last piece of Selenium is the grid. And you might be asking, well, Steve, what the heck does the grid do? Well, the grid serves several functions. The first, of course, is that you never really want to watch tests run on your own desktop, because typically most automation solutions will run your test cases in a browser on your desktop, which means that you don't want to mess with it. You don't want to be on the side trying to answer an email and end up messing up your test cases that are running, because then you'll have to rerun them, or if they are something that has to run like in an order or something, then you're going to cause yourself all kinds of problems. So the grid allows you to actually distribute the execution of your test cases across other machines, like a virtual machine. So therefore, you can kick your tests off and have them run on a virtual machine while you can do whatever you need to on your own desktop. Another great feature of the grid is that you can run multiple browsers at once. So depending on how many CPUs and how much RAM your virtual machine has, you can run 2, 3, 4, even 5 browsers all at the same time. Now that's going to drastically reduce your overall execution time, which means that you're going to get through your test cases much faster. And if you find defects, it's going to allow your development team to get those defects fixed quicker. And that creates a better overall experience for your customers. Next, you need an actual test framework to run your test cases with. There's many popular choices out there, but the ones that I feel are the most popular are NUnit, XUnit, TestNG, and Cucumber. Now, while all of them do have their own pros and cons, for what we're going to do, I feel like the most popular framework is NUnit, so that's what we're going to use in all of our videos. Okay, guys, we're almost done with the talking, and I'm going to get into our code right off. I just had to give you a little bit of background about myself, what this channel is going to be about and stuff, so that way you can see if this channel is going to be something that you want to follow and like and all of that good stuff. So what do you actually need if you want to create and execute Selenium tests? Well, obviously you need the Selenium libraries, and then you need an IDE to actually code your test cases in. And while you can use something like Notepad++ or Sublime, it is great if what you use does actually have IntelliSense, so that way you can get help as you're typing the commands to see what you actually need to put for parameters and such. Microsoft has a couple of different options that you can use for an IDE. The first one is Visual Studio Community, and the second one is Visual Studio Code. Both of those options are completely free. They do act a little bit differently, but they can provide pretty much the same functionality. For these videos, at least at first, I am going to be using Visual Studio Community just because I'm most familiar with it. But as we get going, I may bring into the mix Visual Studio Code because I do know it is a very popular IDE at this point. Now, I code in C#, but if you happen to be a Java developer, there are a couple other tools that you can use as well. One would be Eclipse, and another one would be IntelliJ. All right, it's time to actually get coding. Yay! So let's jump into the computer, and we'll bring down Visual Studio Community. We'll start our first project. We'll bring in the Selenium libraries. We'll bring in NUnit. We'll bring in the Chrome WebDriver, and we'll actually create our first test. Okay, so just open up your favorite browser and just do a search for downloading Visual Studio Community. And you should see a link right at the top, right from Microsoft. If you go to their page, you're going to simply click download. When you may get a warning that says this file is harmful, but we know it's from Microsoft, so it should be fine. So we can just say keep. And then you can just simply click on it, and that will start the Visual Studio installer install, not for Visual Studio Community. So once the Visual Studio installer is actually downloaded and installed, that will let us choose which options we want to install for Visual Studio Community. This install is relatively light, relatively quick. The next one for Visual Studio Community is a little bit bigger and much longer, so I will pause the video when that happens. But when you get to this screen, the only one that you need to check for now is the .NET Desktop Development. And then you're simply going to click on Install, and you'll see that it will start downloading and installing. And we'll be back when this is done. Okay, when Visual Studio is done installing, you should see their web page change to "Thanks for downloading Visual Studio." The Visual Studio installer will still be up, but it will show that it is actually installed. And you should see a sign-in screen for Visual Studio itself. If you did want to share information across machines or use Azure services and stuff, you can create an account, but for now we're just going to skip this. And then this is absolute personal preference for you as far as your theme. I love the dark theme just because it's so much easier on my eyes. And we are going to be doing C#, so I am going to pick C#, and then I'm going to say start. And then in just a couple of minutes, it's going to come up and ask us if we want to create a project, open a project, or whatever it is that we might want to do. All right, so Visual Studio is done installing, and now we can create our very first project. So you'll see a welcome screen like this, and the first thing we want to do is create a new project, and we are going to search up here in the templates for NUnit, and we do want to make sure we pick the one that says C#. You'll see that there's some other languages here, and we do not want the one that says .NET Framework. We are going to be using .NET Core, so if we wanted to, we could execute this on Linux, Mac OS, and other things, versus if you use .NET Framework, the only thing you'll be able to execute it on is a Windows machine. So we're going to say NUnit, we're going to say next, we're going to give the default name fine. We will go in and change all of our settings probably in the next video and go through and customize Visual Studio to make it easier to use. And you typically don't leave the solution and project name the same. So let's just call this one test project 1 the solution, and up here for the projects we'll just put _tests, and then we're going to click next. And we do want to use .NET 6, sure. .NET 7 is actually out at the time of this recording, but we can use .NET 6, that's relatively new. And now we are going to create our project. Okay, so our first project has been created. Because we did an NUnit test project, they automatically gave us a setup method and a regular test method. And then if we expand our dependencies over here, we can see for packages, we already have our NUnit NuGet packages that we can use. So the only thing we really need to bring in at this point is the Selenium WebDriver and our Chrome driver. So we're simply going to right click on packages and say manage NuGet packages. This is going to bring up a new window where we can go get NuGet packages from NuGet.org, which is a public place for anybody to go put NuGet packages for people to use. So right now we're on the installed tab. We want to go to the browse tab, and we are going to search for Selenium. And that's going to go out and find us what we need. So the first one we want is here's our Chrome driver. So we'll bring that down. You'll see that it will show up over here under packages after it's installed. Simply say OK. Now we have our Selenium WebDriver. Our Chrome driver, I should say. And now we need our Selenium WebDriver, which should be right here. Oh, top one. There we go. We'll bring that down. And we'll say OK. And now we have our WebDriver and our Chrome driver that we can use to create a test, drive our browser, and do something fun with. Okay, so now that we have the NuGet packages that we need, let's actually write a test. So since we know that we're going to need to use Selenium and the Chrome browser, we can add some using directives here. We can say using OpenQA is for Selenium, and we can say Selenium, and then we can also say using OpenQA Selenium Chrome. And then just to keep this test super simple, we're not going to deal with setup and teardown routines and that kind of stuff here. We are simply going to just start a browser, watch it open, and then close it. So to start a new browser, we simply type WebDriver. We'll give it a name, driver, and we'll say equals new Chrome driver. Now, because we're using the NuGet package for a Chrome driver, we do not need to specify where the Chrome driver lives on our C drive and stuff like that. But if you were to go download it from the Selenium website and use it, you could actually point to where it is on your hard drive. And we can do that in a later test, but for today, we're going to keep it super simple. So the next thing you want to do is you want to go somewhere with your WebDriver. So we'll just say driver.url equals, and we'll say http google.com. And then when we're done, we simply want to close our browser. So we say driver.close. And that's our first test. And then to run it, what we do is simply inside of our specific test method, we right click and we say run test. And what we should see is we should see a browser open up, go to Google and stop. And because that was so fast, let's just put in a simple wait. We can do that with thread.sleep, and we'll give it a time of 3000 because this is milliseconds. So it's going to wait 3 seconds. So if we simply run this again, see the browser open up, navigate to Google, wait 3 seconds, and then the browser is going to close. And that's our first test. Congratulations. Okay, so you've seen how we can actually install Visual Studio Community, create a project, start an NUnit test project, and actually run a test that starts a browser, navigates to a URL, and close it. And that's basically how you start almost any test. So now it's your turn to go see if you can do the same thing, especially if you've never done anything with Selenium on your own. So you are going to install Visual Studio Community. You are going to create a project. Oops. You're going to add NuGet packages for Selenium WebDriver and the Chrome driver. And then you are going to add the code to your test. And if you follow those 4 steps, you should be successful, and I'll see you in the next video.